joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And, I gave sort of the one-liner. So tell us more about what you're doing when. Or
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
So Jorsek is a software as a service company, as Nasir said. We specialize in software that allows you to manage product content, policy, and procedure in a way that is far more searchable, far more maintainable, lower cost, and able to be published to any of the locations that most companies need to publish today. So PDF, web, multilingual deliverables, a lot of the other digital channels, so you could have like ebooks or things like that in there as well. So basically just reducing the overall cost and effort around digital content.
Awesome. Care to talk about a couple of examples of companies that are using this so people can anchor that?
Yeah, sure. So our customers range quite a bit. So we have... Are these things working yet? Yeah, okay, all right. So I can use this now. I'm not typically a loudspeaker. So our companies range from high-tech companies to some more esoteric type of companies that you may not expect. So we have companies like the silicon chip industry. One of our customers that would probably be a household name is Motorola. It's actually not the phones, but it's Motorola makes radios for police and firemen and those types of things, first responders, et cetera. And when you think about what they do as an organization, they make a radio and then they make 40 variants of that radio. And over time, that radio changes and evolves and all those types of things. And that radio, in all of its different variations, is 90% the same across those different variations of it. So the content is 90% the same. So instead of having 40 manuals, you have one manual that's changed slightly depending on the box it's going into or the person downloading it onto the website. So the real benefit of our software is that whoever you are, you get the content that relates to you. And that may be that you are holding a radio, and that's how you are getting that particular piece of content. That's who you are at that moment in time. Or it might be, in another case, that you are in a state and the regulations have changed. So a policy is different if you're delivering policies and procedures. So it's that ability to create content that's going to become specific for the audience as it's accessed. And then a more esoteric example is the American College of Surgeons uses our software to maintain what is known as the Cancer Staging Manual. And that is the book that is in pretty much every doctor's office, every oncologist's office definitely, that tells you how to stage and treat cancer. And that book is updated more frequently now, less frequently in the past. And what they use our software for is maintaining that book, but also they did a digital transformation project with us so that instead of having to be a book, which is very hard to maintain because it's physical and it doesn't get updated dynamically, they wanted to deliver directly into electronic medical record systems, so like the thing that your doctor types into while you're talking to them. And those have interfaces to our software through an API now. So if there's a change in research or a change in publication, it can go directly out to all those systems into this doctor's office instantaneously. So that ability to do that type of publishing is another one of the major benefits that our software provides.
Great, thank you. So Ben, from there to T-shirts.
Yeah.
Tell us your story.
So we're more than T-shirts. I'm CEO of ViewSPORT, and we're an advanced textiles company. Our objective is to impregnate textiles with different chemistries that can enhance the performance of those textiles. The technology that's foremost in ViewSPORT is called sweat-activated technology. So when you sweat, invisible logos become visible. And that was featured on Shark Tank in 2012. Since then, we've offered other technologies to various clients, be that Gatorade, the Marine Corps, U.S. Army. We're the official apparel for the U.S. Army, official apparel for the Marine Corps. And in 2019, we'll actually be the official apparel sponsor for Ironman globally. So very, very exciting. For us, and the other technologies we offer is permethrin technology, which at the height of the Zika craze, there was concern, obviously, about the Zika virus and its impact on families and certainly women. And we discovered that permethrin, while an existing technology, had never been impregnated in a synthetic fiber. So we were able to impregnate in synthetic fibers and offer that predominantly in South America as well as in Miami, and that was a very successful campaign under the brand Novatech.
Cool. Thanks. So I'm going to stay with you for a sec.
Sure.
You're a Rochester native. You
Yeah.
grew up, moved away, came back. Tell us kind of a little bit about why you decided to build the business here.
Well, I've had many paths. So I grew up in Fairport, graduated high school, went to Binghamton University. From Binghamton, I spent some time in London and studied at Oxford. From there, I moved to New York, and my background's in chemistry, so my objective was to go into medical school, which I did after living in New York, and I went to medical school in the West Indies, where I lived there for 3 years. From there, I transitioned to Baltimore, and then I was studying for a licensing exam, where I was sweating during a workout, and I saw sweat patterns on my shirt, and I thought it'd be really interesting if I can control those sweat patterns in a way that created these motivational messaging. So I had about 40 weeks to go in medical school when I dropped out of medical school to pursue T-shirts. With $250,000 in debt, by the way. So, so I was living with my parents, and I went to a private lab my friend owned, and I figured out how to basically create this technology and then subsequently scale it. The reason I came back to Rochester, obviously I had a network of friends and family, but I stayed in Rochester because I see it as a huge opportunity. I think Richard had a good point. It's kind of it's clay ready to be molded, And I've invested in downtown. I've been in business for about 9 years. We just bought a building on 57 University Ave. It's a corner of Gibbs University, and we're buying other buildings down here because I feel like it's a really great opportunity for growth. And the inconveniences of living in a big city, be it London, which I've lived in, be it in New York, it's a time suck. Everything you do requires time. And to be successful as an entrepreneur, you need as much time resources as you possibly can. And in a market like this, be a third-tier market, you have those resources, but you also have the backing of education systems to support growth in your organization, be that of RIT, University of Rochester, also Kodak. There's a tremendous amount of talent that has come out of Kodak, which you can leverage to further your business, provided it's within your space.
Right.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks. So Patrick, you moved here, right?
So my story is not nearly as interesting as yours, it turns out, but also I have a lot less debt than you.
Debt's been paid.
So I was born here. I was born here in Penfield. I moved around Rochester a little bit as a child, and then I went to SUNY UB and got my bachelor's in computer science, and then I came back afterwards. So, when I was still at UB, that was actually when we had started the company, and I don't think you could really squarely call it a company at that point in time, but we had decided that we were going to do this thing that we didn't really understand. When I say we, I mean me and my business partner, who's still my business partner. And at the time, we were still working on effectively structured content publishing on the web. So it hasn't really changed that much, other than being more successful. And when I graduated, I actually just got in my car and drove to the incubator at RIT and continued working on the project that we were working on at the time. So we've kind of stayed in Rochester for a couple of reasons. Some of them are the things you cited. I mean, it's a lot more convenient than almost anywhere else I've been.
Yeah.
So I've spent a lot of time in other major cities because my job causes me to travel, and I've lived part-time in some other major metros like New York City and things like that, and it's just really inconvenient. And then the other thing too is that the capital efficiency in Rochester has been a huge benefit to us. So the ability for us to live on next to nothing when times were harder is the reason that we didn't give up. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. So, in this community, I think one of the things that is really abundant that I haven't maybe seen as much in other communities is the fact that there's a lot more, that we'll do a lot more with a lot less. Yeah. And the entrepreneurship in community in Rochester is like really gritty or scrappy. And it's not about going out and getting, a $10 million round. Like it's about going out and getting customers. So, I think that that was taught to us, from our days in the incubator all the way up through our time here. And I like that message a lot. So I think we fit inside of the community in a good way. So, I think that culturally it fits with us. I'm from here. It's a really, really capital efficient town. And I like the weather, frankly.
He does. I can vouch for that. Although he likes to ride his bike too. So, that's great. So another thing you guys have in common is you're both relatively new dads.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yep, that's true.
20-month-old and
Yeah.
20-week or 5-week or
5 weeks tomorrow.
5 weeks. Wow.
Yeah.
So I think that deserves a round of applause. And it's a pretty amazing experience to go through that. How has that changed your thinking about kind of where you are and what sort of, this city would mean to you as you think out into the future?
I actually I bought an LLC with my wife and named it after my daughter.
Awesome.
We bought a building for her.
Okay.
No, I think, to follow up on your point, I think a lot of young people are lured to bigger cities early on in their career. They leave college, they want to go to Denver or Austin or Silicon or New York, and they don't realize that downstream when they're 30, 35 and they aim at having a family, the education system we have, the public education system we have in Rochester is incredible, and the resources you have, and just trying to raise your child on a day-to-day basis. The fact that everything's 10 or 15 minutes away, you don't have those opportunities in New York. I have friends that have children in New York, and it's almost impossible. Taking your child to Brooklyn from Manhattan is a 3-hour experience. Taking my child to Wegmans is 8 minutes.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that there's also one of the things that we've seen with our employees is that people stay here because of that reason. Yeah. And one of the things I think you see a lot in like bigger metros is that people bounce a lot, between organizations or between cities, or there just isn't that stickiness that you have here. So our turnover rate in terms of employees in Rochester has been very, very low. And it's because, I think that there's an aspect of like our family's here and we're staying here and we're established here. And there's not that big drive to always be like, getting a little bit more of a raise because the cost of living is so high, or, whatever that thing is. It's just, it's a different culture all around, and it's been very healthy for our organization. So I think those values that come with being able to raise a family inside of a great school system, inside of a good community, have really nicely translated into business. At least they have for us.
To answer your question by focus, I think having a child and having a daughter, it makes me less cavalier with the decisions I make within my business, because the ramifications for those decisions. I mean, we juggle significant money now, millions of dollars a month, and a misstep because I want to pursue something which might be attractive to me and my younger self, I would never do today because of the implications of my child.
Sure.
Yeah.
So for people who are, one of the things that strikes me about Rochester as a relative newcomer here is that we have an incredible amount of talent. We're just swimming in it. 19 schools, almost 100,000 undergrads.
Sure.
And but even if 1% of those people, right, are looking to start a company, that's like 1,000. And what can we do to make that person who may be in a dorm room at RIT or Geneseo or wherever, figure out that there is this world out here, that there are folks like you out there. What are some of your thoughts in terms of how we can make that more visible to that community? Because they're the ones that kind of come in with the tide and leave, right? If they're not from here, they don't know anything besides what they're exposed to on campus.
All right, so I have a lot to say about this, but I'm going to try not to.
He's keeping time, so he'll let us know.
All right. So I think the concise version of my answer is that we should encourage young people to do it the way that Ben did it and not the way that I did it. So I think in some ways, there's part of your question, it should be worded a little bit differently. I don't think we should find kids who want to start companies.
Mm-hmm.
We should find kids that have cool ideas and want to see where they go, or that find kids who found problems and think that they have markets to them.
Yeah.
So like, I was very much a kid who wanted to start a company, and I was going to do it one way or another. And that is not the way to start a company. Right. It is not a path that would send anybody down. Now, it's worked out reasonably well for me, but like in the course of that thing, it took a long, long time. And frankly, it probably wasn't the most efficient use of my time. So I think that having a culture and a community that's built around identifying kids that have kind of the the attributes for it, and then seeing which of them have like really good ideas about their t-shirts or whatever it may be, and then encouraging them to start their own companies. I think that's the way we go about that. I mean, I don't know how you actually transform that into tactical implementation, but I think that's the way I would look at it.
Ben, your thoughts?
I would agree with that. I think a lot of young entrepreneurs jump into something and they spin their wheels for many a year and realize their business is going to fail. It's hard to identify somebody that has the chutzpah and grit that's going to be able to last the 3 to 4 or 5 years to see the idea through. I think it's one thing to vet the individual, but I think there should also be a vetting process for the idea, because not all ideas are going to translate in the world. But I think going to campuses and doing events like this, I think would be certainly helpful, because I'm sure there are some phenomenal ideas that are being taken out of this community, which could certainly stay in this community because the resources present to support those ideas and those growth, and certainly the VC backing and the angel investors that would invest in early startups.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. In fact, when we started Upstate Venture Connect, it was really driven by the recognition that Netflix, NVIDIA, Airbnb, Android, all of these amazing companies that we just take for granted had founders who either went to school here or grew up here. And it's an incredible realization to see that it's not that we stopped creating entrepreneurs, it's just that they were building their companies elsewhere.
Exactly.
And so figuring out how to bridge that gap is obviously what I and Richard and others spend a lot of time thinking about. So we're going to have a couple of quick questions and then open this up to the audience for their questions. Ben, you've spent a fair amount of time as a professional musician.
Yeah.
Right? And music plays a big role in your life. I love the sax that you showed me when I visited your office. So what role do you think music can play in our development as a community?
Well, I mean, there's really only 2 music schools. It's Eastman and Juilliard. So if you're into jazz, it's Eastman. There's no question about it. And, I'm a block away from that. And I participated in the Eastman School of Music when I was growing up. I went to Hochstein. That is an incredible resource. And, I think that the Jazz Festival is underutilized. And I think that there's more that can be done in a club scene and from just a music composition scene that could really enhance the resources of Eastman. Daft Punk cut their last album at the Eastman School of Music, and nobody knew about it. Yeah, and the studio,
I had no idea
the
about
studio
that.
is a $25 million studio. It's on a par with New York and Los Angeles. Literally Daft Punk.
Yeah, so there needs to be some more marketing around.
Exactly. There are so many great albums and there's so many great musicians that are unexposed in the community. And I think there should be a greater effort to expose what's going on. And there are great educators that play on a national stage that are unexposed. On the saxophone scene, you have John Viavatni, you've got Bill Tiberio, you've got Roger Eckers. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he was my educator. And Roger Eckers has a #1 jazz album in Japan and has one for the last 10 years.
Wow.
Nobody knew about it. Just phenomenal talent that I think is underutilized, underexposed. We have this kind of blip during Jazz Fest where we kind of get a taste for it and then it disappears. But we have the world's best jazz studio, and I think people take advantage of it to an extent, but not to the extent. You have the best students in the world, the best music being created, and some of the best and talented musicians making and creating music, not just here, but abroad. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. It's an amazing asset for us, for sure. So, Patrick, last question for you before we open it up to the audience. you're at a point where you're sort of trying to figure out what the next stage of growth for your company looks like. And as you try to assess what you're going to need to get there, what are some of the assets that you think Rochester has in abundance, and what are some where you feel more could be added to help companies like you?
That's a great question. See, I had lunch with you today, and I asked you if you were going to ask me any questions like this, and you told me not to prepare. So
I thought you'd be living this.
Yeah, okay. So I think Rochester, it has a good talent pool. Like, there's no doubt about that. We have a highly educated workforce, as you said, and I think that's been really good for us because I think that the people who you can find here are probably a higher class than you would expect in a city of our size. So I think that's worked out really well for us. And I'm a really strong believer that the strength of an organization is really embodied in its team. Now that's probably also a belief that aligns really strongly with a software as a service company because, your team is the entire thing that produces and sells and supports your product, and that effectively is your product. So your team kind of is your product at the end of the day. So I think that Rochester has been good to us in terms of people, and I think that there's no way to really understate that in terms of what that's meant for our company, because that has been really, really key. In terms of what Rochester could provide more of, I think that Rochester is kind of an old industrial city in some ways. And one of the things that we really struggled with was a lot of the ideas that are old industrial ideas that don't apply so much to the way that our company runs as we kind of grew up inside of the incubation system. And that's not to say that they were bad ideas, they just weren't good ideas for us necessarily. So I think that there needs to be more high-tech focus that applies to software specifically, because there just isn't a lot of what we do in Rochester. So there's Cloud Checker, and there's some. I guess you can put second half software in there, and there's Eric's company. I'm sorry, I forgot the name of your company right now, Eric. There are other companies, but there aren't a ton of them, and I don't feel like we get together often enough. And maybe that's on me. So maybe what I'm saying is that I'm not doing a good enough job here in the community. But I think that we all have similar issues, and we all have similar growing pains, and that what would be really beneficial for me as someone who's working in one of these companies would be to have some advice that related more to that and a community in which I could get more information about those types of things.
Interesting. Thank you.